Before we get to the buy low and sell high, we talked about the hot. Got to talk about the not. Who's not hot?
I do want to give just two quick hot honorable mentions.
Please.
Willie Adames has 3 home runs in the last 2 games, and I think he went 4 for 4 today with 8 RBIs over the last 2 games. So Adames has been hot. And then Kirby Yates, a guy that we talked about a couple weeks ago about getting that Texas Rangers closer role, looks like he's got it. He hasn't
Time to
had
drop Leclerc.
many opportunities, but yes, 100% time to drop Leclerc. Kirby Yates looks like he's locked in, and he has yet to give up a run in 11 appearances so far. So go Kirby Yates. So my first not. And I kind of stick to a little bit of a theme here with a lot of these younger guys, because there's a lot of young guys who are not hot. And my first one kind of hurts me in a lot of ways, but it is Wyatt Langford. Not that he's been horrible. He hasn't been like the worst player in baseball, right? But just a lot of people were picking him near the top 100, especially when they found out that he was going to come up. He was a top 100 pick pretty easily, right? When the news came that he was going to break camp, and his average is hanging around 240. His underlying stuff, it's all like middle of the order stuff, middle of the pack. He's just not like popping like we would have expected. And so that's why I'm saying he's a not hot guy, because again, I just think we expected a lot from him. Maybe like I just thought of like a Devers earlier in the season, where you just have big expectations and he's not filling it. So Wyatt Langford is my first cold guy.
My first cold, and I like to do this because I like, as we talked about with Olsen and Pete, I like to follow up on guys that we talked about earlier, like you just did with Kirby Yates. Garrett Crochet, who we talked about, like, hey, what's the deal? Is this guy actually this good? Well, over the last 2 weeks, 12 innings, still has the strikeout numbers with 16, but a 10.5 ERA. So he's come back down to earth. I see he's back down to only 49% rostered, and he's the 500th ranked player in fantasy right now. So he's not been good. He's been, what he's been in his career, which is inconsistent, has strikeout stuff, but is going to give up runs. And so, if you were one of these people who listened to our show and was like, hey, pick him up, maybe it's time to drop him, or maybe ride the wave, see what happens. But he's not a guy that I'm putting in, making sure he's keyed into my lineup every week for every start, because you're going to get this from him. And this is what we warned when people did get off to that hot start the first couple of weeks of April.
Yeah, I remember he had that 7-inning start against Atlanta that he just looked dominant. And
right. Shoved.
I'm like, you kind of said it. I'm like, I had a friend text me, Crochet is a stud. Why'd you tell me not to grab him? I never said don't at that point, but don't expect this, right? And, obviously it's a long season. He can have some more great starts. Maybe he's a streaming option, but not a guy that I want on my roster if I don't need him to be. My next cold is Jackson Chourio. Again, another guy who has really hurt me in quite a few leagues. I did draft him in too many redraft, but Dynasty for sure. I was really expecting him to kind of take a step forward, and it's obviously a long season, but he just hasn't, and he may be losing playing time at some point in the near future, if he hasn't already. And it kind of sucks because he started off really well. He had hits in 11 of his 13 games, and he's now hitting just over 200, and his underlying stuff does not look good. So maybe it's just a transition period. It's a new environment, a lot of new things happening for him. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of doubt in Dynasty. If this opens up even a very small window in Dynasty, I am all over it. But Jackson Chourio is cold right now. No way around that.
My cold is another guy we talked about to start the season. Randy Arozarena he has a 220 on base on the season, and he's 2 for his last 21, 2 hits in his last 21 at bats. One of those hits happens to have been a home run, so the numbers look a little inflated with production. He has a home run, RBI, 3 RBIs, a run scored, but 2 for his last 21. And this is a guy who we talked about, whether it's the World Baseball Classic, whether it's the playoffs, similar to Adolis Garcia, right? Shows up and shows out and is great. But then you forget, in these limited short spurts, some of these guys feed off that energy. Kind of talked about it last week with Javi Baez, who, by the way, on base 375 is in the last week. So I'm not wrong. I'm not willing to take the L on it yet. I know he hasn't had a monster week, but he hasn't been bad. Just wait for the New York series, I promise. He's hitting a homer in New York. Anyway, but Randy Arozarena in short spurts, again, gets fired up for these big matchups, big series, and goes off. As a whole, he's not as good a baseball player as he's, as people think of him as. And that's my problem with him, and that's what he's proven this year.
See, I almost wanted to put a Rosarena as a buy low because I do believe in Cowboy. But then I looked at his Savant page and looking at the trend over the last few years, his underlying stuff has never really been that great. Like 2023, he had some really good stuff, but before then, he was just kind of okay. And I think his surface numbers just looked a lot better. And maybe this is just the ebb and flow of those underlying stuff kind of catching up with the surface, right? He looked great, and now it's time for him to look bad as far as just his numbers, surface numbers. So good call out there. I thought about him as a buy low, but I just couldn't do it. So I think he's a good cold guy.
I think he's just a cold player. I don't think he's a buy low. I don't have him there.
No, I agree.
Who's your
with
last
that.
cold?
My last cold is a guy that I told you to buy maybe a couple weeks ago. I want to, I'm human. I'll make mistakes, right? Ivan Herrera for the St. Louis Cardinals has been ice cold, and it looks like he has lost his playing time as well. Obviously, Wilson Contreras coming back, looking great. Since April 19th, he is 2 for 18 with 6 strikeouts, which if you realize April 19th, you're like, hey, Vince, that was a couple weeks ago. And how does Willie Castro have 35 at-bats since April 24th and Ivan Herrera has 19 or 18 since April 19th? It's because he has no playing time. He's not playing. And so on top of being a poor hitter right now, he's just not playing. He is a pretty easy draft for me in almost every format. And he is ice cold, but could pick it up again. He's got a great bat, but just not right now. And the path to playing time is not an easy one.
This is a week-to-week sport. It's a week-to-week league. Things happen quickly. So like you just said that, my guy also, if you look at his numbers from the last 2 weeks, he's on base 350, 4 home runs, 9 RBI, 6 runs scored. You look at his numbers from the last 7 days, he's 1 for his last 18. That's Cal Riley. So by no means am I telling you Cal Riley's not going to be great. He's going to be great. He's been really good this year. He has 6 homers, 13 RBIs, 12 runs scored, on base, a little low, but like I said, over the last 2 weeks, it's 350. Considering that it's 150 in the last week, that's really good. So 1 for his last 18, that's where it kind of like sucks, including 0 for 4 today. So Cal Riley is cold, but he'll get hot again. But I don't want to limit this to people who are going to be cold forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
right.
so I do think he'll turn it around. But if you're paying attention, Cal Riley, maybe if you have another option, 2-catcher league, or you have 2 catchers on your roster and you can plug someone else in, maybe plug someone else in for a couple of games because he's been really cold for the last week.